for the audience, it gets a little repetitive too at some point when it's like six people and we're all like, we think that UX should be easy.
Yeah, yeah, that's most of these faces these days. But, I was talking to, the Everclear guys today and I was like, you know what? We need more panels and spaces where people like openly disagree and like there's like big opinion disparities. Like,
I think
Yeah.
UX should be harder.
And so here's
gotta earn
Charco
it.
coming in. You gotta earn it. I honestly feel like I've heard that before.
Bro, it's kind of the PMF of like meme coins because they're a little bit difficult, but not difficult enough. So like, you feel like you've like learned something if you're brand new to crypto and you get in and you start buying meme coins. It's like, all right, I deserve this 30x.
It's the win. Yeah, it's the subtle wins. I actually do kind of agree with that in a way. Like, I think that's kind of why we've gotten so far where we are today with the lack of products or anything, is because it's pretty difficult and you get this sense of accomplishment for actually onboarding.
That's true. I mean, in 2021, imagine like learning to mint from the contract on Etherscan. You're like, putting your
Like a
life
fucking
savings in these
veteran, dude.
NFTs. It really was like a very interesting time. And we just overcame these insane UX hurdles. And some people still live in that world, I think. People are like 2022 pilled, 2021 pilled, and they're just used to bad UX everywhere and they
Yeah.
don't even care about innovating.
That's actually, you know what? I'm gonna get that as a good place to start. What do you think? And Tabasco, why don't you get started? Because I know we've seen this around. What do you think about the conversation of like, I care what chain I'm on versus I don't care what chain I'm on?
Yeah, this is like, I've been seeing more and more tweets where people are like criticizing chain abstraction and just like kind of this UX movement in general where they say like, chain abstraction doesn't make any sense because everybody's gonna want to know what chain they're on. And like, I get that as a vision or kind of like as an opinion, but I think that a lot of these people that say this ultimately, at least from my perspective, is that most of the users that are in the space today, like meme coin traders or whatever, like the people that you see on CT, these are not the target audience for like the solutions that we made from chain abstraction. The target audience is like normal users that will actually use applications that are kind of more geared towards this user base. And as a result, most of these guys, they don't care about the chain that they're using. I mean, this is like, if a bunch of protocol engineers like got together in a roundtable and said, everybody should care what like internet protocol they're using or what cloud provider they're using. Why wouldn't somebody care? It's like, well, clearly, like nobody outside of this small bubble really cares about that. So I think it's kind of this conversation is getting to a point where for a long time, the way that I looked at it was like, well, some applications will show users this and some won't. But I think, I don't know if, maybe it was a panel that you're on or some other panel at ECC. It was, with Dean Tribble from Agoric. He made this really good analogy that I like, which is like, he compared the experience or the prospective experience to that of like when you're booking a flight on like Travelpedia or something like that. Because like with that, if I go and book a flight, I can just say, I want to go to Singapore, right? And just give me the best price and the easiest way to do it or whatever the fastest way to get there. And then I just book that. I don't care about the airlines that I'm taking and the layover times and stuff like this. Like those are details that are pretty irrelevant to me as a buyer. But if I want to know if that's important to me, if I really do care, like I want to do United and I can't have, more than a 2-hour layover between each flight, then it's like, that information is available to me within those websites. It's just hidden by default. So by default, they don't show that. But if you want that information, you can go out and just click a button and seek it out. So I think that's probably how most applications will handle it with chain abstraction, is that by default, it will be removed. And I think this is like, I think it's a little bit naive to think that like all users are going to want to know what chains they're on. I think that probably isn't going to be the case, especially with consumers. But I do think that it'll be an option for users that care about that information. They can click a button and they can figure that out. I do think that's important. But yeah, it's an interesting conversation. There's a lot of criticism around chain abstraction because of that idea.
Franco, what about you?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I really shouldn't have to worry about the chain. But there's also some like risk assumptions of being on some chains. You might believe them, you might not, but I think like, I don't know, like Arbitrum will argue that Arbitrum's the best because of their proofs and blah, blah, blah. And then there's like economic security of an alt L1, like, maybe it collapses. So like, you're going to kind of make consumers make that decision unknowingly, which is interesting. But ultimately, the best user experience is just going from app to app to app and not feeling like you're constrained by where your funds are, and you can just freely and easily use all the apps in crypto. So that should be the goal state, I think. And then there's interesting implications for like chains as well, because I think some chains have their own ecosystems that don't interoperate well. Solana. And you know, just like everyone lives on that chain, and it's like easy to do, and it's good for Solana, but like if you have a killer app, it should maybe be accessed by anyone, and you should live on the merit of your apps and not your like walled garden cult.
Do you think that killer apps take the form, like in like, let's say like 2-3 years, maybe 5 years, whatever. Do you think killer apps are like chain agnostic, or is it like pump.fun on Solana? Like, does that make sense, the question?
Yeah, are killer apps chain agnostic, or say it to me in a different way, like I'm a retarded 5.
Is it going to matter? Like, is the chain actually going to matter? Like, I'll give you an example. Pump.fun works for Solana, but we've yet to see like this kind of omni-chain killer app without being like, obviously Uniswap being primarily ETH, or fucking, OpenSea being primarily ETH, and then Magic Eden being Solana, and then Pump.fun being Solana. But we've never seen like a chain agnostic killer app. Do you think there's a possibility for that to exist? Or do you think there's always going to be this like chain dominance there?
I think there's a possibility for it to exist for sure. I think the interesting thing to note about Pump.fun is that it just produces SPL20 tokens, which just then live on Solana. And so it's like, how can you really have like a multi-chain version of it? Like, are we saying that, you know, they're going to be launching ERC20s on base, and like what happens if it launches an ERC20 on ETH and then I accidentally buy it and pay a $50 gas fee and break my laptop? What else, Tabasco?
No, go ahead. You can continue. I'll just, whenever you're done.
I was done, bro. I was trying to gracefully.
We can
stop
yell
talking.
over each other. I'm trying to create an environment where we're screaming over each other. So if we can do that as aggressively as possible, I think that would be a successful space. You know what I mean?
Tabasco, give me
There
a
it
good point,
is.
bro.
There it is.
Yeah, I think that actually the question that you asked, Burnt, is a really good one, and I think it actually isn't talked about enough. Like, this is one of the topics of chain abstraction that I've been thinking a lot about. I actually tweeted about this today, because I've been thinking about it, and it's like, I think that the idea of, and your question specifically was like, should these killer apps, like, are they always going to exist, like, on specific chains and require, like be bound to certain chains, or will they be agnostified? I think that they have to be agnostified, to be sustainable. And so, for example, like with Pump.fun, that's kind of a unique thing because people are willing to bridge over to Solana to use that application because, I don't know, they want to make money or whatever. But, I think in most cases with most applications, the issue with like the way that the industry operates today is that whenever I produce an application, and even if it's a great application, my like addressable market is the user base of whatever chain I deploy it on. So if I deploy it on Solana, my initial market, unless I create something that is like, that people want to take the effort and bridge over to, like Pump.fun, in most cases, the market that I am capturing is whatever user base is on that chain. So Solana, I'm addressing Solana users. Like Ethereum and Base users, I'm most likely not addressing them unless like, like I said, like it's something special. And so this is a problem because it means that there's kind of two issues. The first major issue is that this creates an environment, unfortunately, where like developers actually aren't really incentivized to create applications that are actually innovative. And so there's a lot more incentives for application developers to just like take a fork of Uniswap or whatever DeFi protocol and just throw it on, like slap a new logo on it and throw it on like 30 different chains. Because to be honest, this actually makes better revenue than if I'd had one killer app on one chain or on a few different chains, in a lot of cases. And so I think so whenever chain abstraction starts to proliferate and actually be adopted on a wider scale, what's going to happen all of a sudden is that at the user experience level, users are going to be able to go to Pump.fun or whatever other application on any chain and use it from assets and from wallets from any other blockchain in any other environment, right? This is what Particle is doing. This is what XION is doing, and other infrastructure providers that are enabling this. And so as an application developer, all of a sudden my addressable market goes from this super siloed small set of users that have taken the effort to get funds onto the specific blockchain And all of a sudden, this expands to the entire Web3 industry. And so my market goes tenfold, right? So like as an application developer, this shifts the entire structure, and it also shifts incentives, because it means that as a developer, my competition is now not only applications on Solana, my competition is applications across the entire industry, across every blockchain, because the users are agnostified. Which means that as a developer, I need to be far more cognizant of my user experience, of the security of my application, because it takes more to get users, because there's more noise, there's more competition in this regard. So what will happen is we'll see better and better applications as a result, because that's how you make money in this ecosystem. And so I think like this is one of the lesser discussed parts of chain abstraction. It's not like it's not only the UX piece. I think that like the industry is going to have a pretty huge shift in incentives and actual application dynamics, just because of the fact that users are no longer confined to specific blockchains. And as a result, applications can be accessed from anywhere. So I think I'm really excited to see how this will pan out.
Nice. And I remember it was earlier, I think it was either earlier today or yesterday, you asked a question in one of the group chats that we're all in, which asked the scope of chain abstraction. And so for people listening, there were the question was, what was the scope of chain abstraction? Two answers, of abstraction of all complexities of crypto, which is obviously a little broader, and then the abstraction of specifically multi-chain, complexities. Where do you stand on kind of where you feel the scope of chain abstraction should be? Is it I know we're kind of talking about it now, do we just focus on making the chains agnostic, or do we want to kind of go that step further?
Yeah, I was surprised, because honestly.
Me too. I was surprised at the voting of that as well.
Yeah. And, I did a poll on Twitter, and I got pretty similar results. Like actually on Twitter, I think it was almost 50-50. Because always in my mind, at least, like since I started, kind of like, getting really into chain abstraction, and since I started building in this, 6 or 7 months ago, I've always looked at chain abstraction as a very narrow thing that is specifically addressing multi-chain complexity. And as recently as I started really deep, like digging into more content from different protocols that are talking about chain abstraction, I realized that like this is actually not a uniform understanding of chain abstraction. Like there's actually two different ways of looking at the term and the experience here. One way is, like you said, like this, like chain abstraction is actually removing all on-chain complexities. So key management, gas management, cross-chain, everything. It's like the complete UX solution. Whereas like the way that I've always seen it is like it's specifically addressing multi-chain. So for example, like cross-chain workflows and bridging and stuff like this, even gas management, I guess could fall into that. And so when I did that poll on Twitter and in that Telegram group, I was curious just how segmented the opinions were here. I think generally what I've seen is that like there's somewhat, and it's actually interesting. So on the group, on that group that I put it in, of course, that's a group of purely chain abstraction protocols. There's more of a leaning towards the opinion that it's narrow. Whereas on Twitter, I think there was far more of a leaning towards the opinion that it's broad. So there's a disparity between like public opinion and internal opinion. And so this is actually a problem that I think we probably need to solve, is that like there's actually no uniform understanding of where chain abstraction ends. But personally, I do see it as a little bit narrow. Although I think that, Orb Labs, Richard, he was on one of these.
Yeah, of course.
We had this call. I don't know if you were there. It was last week. It was the chain abstraction workshop call. It was just like Google Meet that we did. And he mentioned this idea that it might be broad, right? Or it might be narrow right now. Just because it's still pretty early in the technology, and like it's better to focus on like a certain scope, and like a narrow problem to solve. And then as it gets solved and as the technology expands, the scope will broaden into eventually encompassing all complexities. Mm-hmm. And so I like that take as well. But it's been interesting to see the segmentation of opinion on this, over the past
Something I'm really interested in is, like I love the point of like, okay, how far do we take chain abstraction? Is it just making it easy to like bridge across chains, or, like what are we talking about here? Well, a phrase that I've not heard tossed around much, but I think will be much more prevalent in the future, will be DApp abstraction. And that is, people don't really care about what DeFi platform they're on. They care about what yield they're getting. And if you can make an aggregator that plugs into all lending markets, and you just, path and route your ETH into the most productive yield farm possible, then it doesn't matter what dApp you're on. You can have one front end, one dApp that you interact with, and then it accesses all these different lending markets and like rebalances you whenever you need just to get the highest yield on your ETH in a delta neutral position, whatever you're trying to execute. You can get really smart with like actually how dApp abstraction, chain abstraction looks. And that's a project that Codex is actually working on. Pretty interesting.
Nice. That's you know what? That's an interesting, without shilling your project, cause I know I would say XION here. What's each of your favorite companies? And you're not allowed to say anyone on stage either. This is no bullshit here. What is your favorite project, building in the chain abstraction space? Chunker, you want to take that off?
Honestly, dude, I'm not smart enough to answer this question because
favorite, dude. What do you mean?
Geez, man, like I don't really understand the tech. Like I'm all like narratives based right now, and like the only tech I've used, I'm not gonna say it's my favorite. So until there's like live projects,
until it works, I feel that.
yeah,
I fuck with that.
I'm gonna hold off until it works. Otherwise, I'm just gonna like say where my friends work and shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I get that. I appreciate that. Ethan, what about you?
Yeah, I think that it's hard to give like one specific project. I really like what One Balance is doing.
Mm-hmm.
Since like really learning about credible accounts and the problem that it solves, I've always been a big fan of kind of like the scope of that problem and just the idea of credible accounts solving such a pretty monumental issue, especially for the other chain abstraction projects. And I think that the way they've handled it and just like the traction that they've had is great. So I'm a big fan of One Balance, and then also Everclear is killing it as well.
Nice. Yeah.
Everclear is doing an amazing job with everything recently. I think they just started kicking things off recently. They did a tweet. They had like some of their first transactions. So I'm a big fan of everything that they're building. The other point is that like I don't have a specific product for this, but there's a lot of people building in this space, so I don't want to like call one person out. But I'm also a huge fan of the idea. And I show this a lot, even though it's not something that we do at Particle. We're at a different point in the stack, but I love the idea of applications that like compose across multiple chains simultaneously, and that like actually on a programmatic level allow developers to do transactions and like have workflows that very easily span multiple chains, or like even to developers, the notion of a specific blockchain that they're using becomes like relatively abstract. I'm a big fan of that idea. I think Near's been leaning into that idea a little bit more recently. Agoric, of course, Socket. And so I think I've been watching that part of the vertical really closely, and I'm a big fan of that.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like I was going to say Everclear. I also love the Agoric guys just because I've known them for frickin' ever, and they're always so much fun too. But yeah, I mean, and I guess like as we look at, you know, kind of when you talk about like the stack, maybe like Chuck, are you familiar with the Cake framework?
Cake? No, I'm not. Explain it.
Cake framework is like, it was proposed by Frontier Research for chain abstraction, and it kind of talks about like the different levels of effectively the stack. And then, Ethan, definitely fucking jump in if I'm talking nonsense here. But talking about the 4 different layers of the stack, I believe that it's, settlement solver permission application. Is that right, Ethan?
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Hell yeah. What are your, I guess the question was going to be, what are your kind of thoughts? But this also, Ethan, this kind of goes off of your other question in the poll of how we think we should be addressing the stack.
Yeah, I think, like the chain abstraction stack is an interesting thing. The Cake framework, and actually real quick, you said something interesting on, I listened to your space with Seda. And you said something there, like the frameworks don't really matter. Like it's just kind of like, I don't know, like ideological circle jerk or whatever.
I probably said those words exactly, actually.
Yeah, like I understand that perspective as well. And like, I think that the main reason for frameworks like the Cake framework, or we've even produced a multi-layer framework, which is like a slightly different way of looking at it. The reason for this is from a more like ideological sort of, developer perspective. Not having a framework to understand the composition of projects, I think creates, just the issue of like, it's kind of unclear where collaboration happens. Because for example, like a big part of the Cake framework was to understand like how different technologies interoperate to create what is a chain abstraction experience. And with the multi-layer framework that we did, that was more so answering the question of like, how do actual chain abstraction solutions, which use the technologies in the Cake framework, how do they interoperate to create a kind of like full chain abstraction experience? So not that like it's a super tangible thing, but I think that like in general, I've been like kind of a little bit less, I guess, convinced that the Cake framework is the best way to look at things now. I think we're kind of like moving a little bit past that. I think the Cake framework was a good early representation, but the space has matured so much since then. Everclear is doing an interesting kind of ecosystem map, which I think is it's kind of built on the Cake framework. I think it's a little bit better way of representing things, but, and our multi-layer framework, it's not really comparable with the Cake framework because it's much higher level, meant for specifically comparing solutions like XION, Particle, Agoric, Everclear, and not so much the actual underlying technologies.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
But yeah, I definitely do think that there's a chain abstraction stack, and that there's a need to just at least understand where collaboration needs to happen to create a cohesive experience. But yeah, I've been trying to figure out better ways to express it other than like Cake or more, some of these more intent centric methods of looking at it.